Yeah, it's so great to be here. Thank you all for sticking it out to the bitter end. And also, I'm so happy to go right after Adam because really, this is this whole idea of old maps and new insights. It is enabled by Adam's incredible project. So I am limited on time, so I'm going to throw up this slide for just half a second. This is how I got here. I've lived in multiple states. I now live in Richmond, Virginia, which is an awesome city that y'all should come out to sometime. Okay, so how many of you in here have seen a map like this before? Yeah, right. These maps are super common. They are in cities all over the United States. We often call this a redlining map. I think that's kind of become the popular term for it. I think it might be a little bit more accurate sometimes to call it a residential security map. That's not commonly used. Or a homeowner's loan corporation map, a HLC or Hulk map. So I might use all those terms interchangeably, but basically what I'm talking about is a map from the New Deal era that was drawn in conjunction with real estate agents by a federal agency in order to assess mortgage risk. And basically the outcome was deprioritizing and setting up the disinvestment of central cities like Richmond. But redline maps, they've been around for a while, and I think the thing I want to do first and foremost here is actually like try to kind of like, I don't know, get us a little bit past them. And there's a very good article called "The Tyranny of the Map: Rethinking Redline." It's by Robert Gioli. I don't know if I said that quite right, but it's in the urban planning blog, The Metropole. This came out a couple years ago, and I'm just going to highlight something from the conclusion here. He writes, "A discussion of redlining is not an endpoint, but an entry point. We also need to confront the reality that the map isn't what's making decisions, it's all of us. It's about the people. The maps are symbolic and they are evidence of racism and discrimination, but the maps themselves aren't actually perpetuating it." So to put this in a little graphic, I think it's really key that we're not thinking of maps as the cause of inequality. Rather, I think it's a better way to conceptualize it as these maps being something that correlate and are connected to many different forms of inequality. And I think what is more important is that we're trying to think about and investigate the actual causes: racism, segregation, policy decisions, real estate practice, disinvestment, destruction. Those are just examples of specific human actions that actually cause inequality, not maps. Maps can be tools for them or symbols of them, but we got to kind of get out of the sort of simplistic thinking of, all right, the maps did this, and that's why we have these problems. So in this case, I want to treat Sanborn map, or not HLC maps, redlining maps, as evidence. And as a scholar now and someone who works as a researcher, basically what we do at the Digital Scholarship Lab, one of our main projects is to ask, how can we make it easier to use and understand HLC maps? How can we use them as evidence to see instances of all these things on the left? So we're really excited that in the last year we've rolled out a new update to our flagship project, Mapping Inequality. This is the homepage, and the first thing you'll notice is that it's got way more maps. The exciting thing is that a lot of these maps aren't actually maps that were made by the Homeowners Loan Corporation, but are redlining maps. But the interesting thing about them is it actually doesn't make as much sense sometimes to call them a redlining map, because if it allows me to zoom here, does that work out? Okay, right, so we can actually see that on this particular map, the key says that the red area is the very good white residential section. So in a way, this isn't really a redlining map. It's actually the purple area that would be the Negro residential section, right? It's the same ideas, but it's not the same symbology. And I think that's really interesting to add these into the database and investigate them. All right, we've also added commercial and industrial areas. This is something that was previously omitted from the data set. So if you have a map project that uses redlining data and you haven't updated for a while, you should update, because now you can get all of these polygons for industrial and commercial areas. And they make up really significant portions of many cities. Like in Stockton, for instance, 30% of the area that's covered by the HLC polygons is actually classified as industrial or commercial. And that's really important because redline areas it was a specific criteria that if they were in close proximity to an industrial area, they would generally be downgraded significantly. We also upgraded our base map, and I'll just give a quick shout out to Mapbox. Mapbox has been a sponsor of this project, and they allow us to use the tiles for free, which is big because we do get a decent amount of traffic. So I really want to credit Mapbox for supporting us there, because probably we'd have to use something else. Although now that I've been to this conference, I see that there are a ton of great options, because yeah, Protomap, it's great. It's great to see. I'm really excited to explore PM tiles. But yeah, so we worked on legibility to get the labels to pop a little more. We also did some nice sandwiching. We've been talking about burgers. What I like now is that we've got the motorways running over the red line areas, and that's a really typical pattern that happens with as a legacy of redlining is they kind of laid the groundwork for the interstates to run through cities, and now it's a little bit easier to see how they correspond. So Tacoma, yep, definitely an example of that. And we've got some new symbology to accommodate those new types of areas that we've added to the data set. So that's the commercial and industrial areas. And we had to do some kind of tricky things because it'd be a little inconsistent on whether those are separated out or not. What's really cool is we've got this guided context for a number of cities. So we now have, through an ACLS grant, more than 70 essays that were written by local experts that tell the unique stories of redlining, and we give an interactive tour. So I'm gonna make this bigger. Yeah, it's really neat. You can scroll through these and actually hover over specific locations to see what we're talking about, and we've got some photos. And if there is a specific area that we're talking about that has redlining information, you can go straight to it. You can see the scan of the area description. So this is really awesome. If you've not been on Mapping Inequality lately, I really, really invite you to come check this out. So, area descriptions. I think in many ways, these might be just as, if not more important than the maps themselves. This is the meat of the work that the Homeowners Loan Corporation did. And there are transcriptions of 8,000 of these descriptions on the site, and they really illustrate the overt racism and classism of the whole project. This is kind of really hard to read, but it's basically an example of how much the HLC was, I'll read it out. 3 highly respected Negro families own homes and live in the middle of the block area facing Verde Street. While very much above the average of their race, it is quite generally recognized by realtors that their presence seriously detracts from the desirability of their immediate neighborhood. It is probably the most bald-faced version of judging someone on the color of their skin rather than the content of their character. That's literally what this is about. You don't get that just from looking at the map. That's buried in the area description. So we really want to emphasize those and make it more accessible for people to read. And so to do that, we have created a search engine so that you can look up any term that's mentioned in the area descriptions and start to analyze the patterns. So I'll let this run. This is a GIF, but it is very intriguing to go on here and see how different terms have different frequencies and how they correspond with the various grades. And I'll let this start over. I think the most interesting one to me, lawn, all green, right? Very much corresponds with the quote-unquote best areas. Some different parts don't have as much of a distinct red versus green breakdown. But yeah, again, go play with this. It's really neat. And what has been studied a bunch, and there have been a bunch of really, really, really good research projects that come out of this, is that it is pretty well established now that the pattern of redlining is very closely associated with a whole host of detrimental outcomes, but in particular health outcomes. So if you compare the redlining map on the left to the corresponding census tracts, and you break them into quartiles with the CDC overall social vulnerability index, you basically see that for a city like Richmond, and I think this is pretty common for a lot of southern cities and cities across the US, not much of a difference. Obviously, you can get much more granular into this, but the trends hold. And what that looks like on the ground is that growing up in an area on the west side, one of the richest and whitest areas of Richmond, you'd expect to have a life expectancy of 86 years, whereas on the east end, that life expectancy is 68. So that's a pretty big difference, and there are a whole host of negative health outcomes. And I'm going to deviate a little bit here. So there are many limitations of HLC maps. The first is that, like, their neighborhood scale, they're not that detailed. As we've seen, they were created by heavily biased racist real estate practice. It was literally in the National Association of Realtors Code of Ethics that a realtor should not introduce people of different races into neighborhoods. And that was from 1924 to 1974. The Realtor Association, they apologized for this in 2020. So it's well known. But redlining maps, they can be really inconsistent in their level of detail. And I went to Jerry Shannon's talk, and he talked about passive versus active maps when you're doing this type of research. And I think it's like one of the prime examples of a passive map that's really, like he said, pathologizing the people who live there. So what we want to ask instead is, what are the specific mechanisms that make the legacy of redlining harmful to human health, and where do they occur? This is where Sanborn maps come in. So I got to visit the Library of Congress and check out these maps. They're awesome. If you're in DC, the first thing you should do is go to the Library of Congress map room and go check this out. They're super detailed, so much more so than the redlining maps. Again, very large maps, very detailed. That's the same laptop right here. Here's how much the scale differs, right? So we're looking at one tiny little chunk of an edge of a redline area, and this is what we can see inside on a redlining map. So let's enter Sanborn maps into the evidence like we do with Hulk maps. I'm looking at a very small area, and what we're seeing here on the left is George Washington Carver Elementary School, which the Sanborn map makers indicated was a colored school because we're talking about segregated Richmond of 1952. And this is basically across the street from the Richmond City Gas Works. So this is very intense fossil fuel infrastructure that is very likely to have contaminated and polluted the area. Using Adam's platform, we can get a lot more context by georeferencing this. And we've got a team of cumulative of 50 plus students that have worked on this project. And we've georeferenced 220 volumes for 47 cities, which leads to 17,000 spatially referenced layers. So we're hauling in a ton of data because Adam's platform is awesome to work on. And we're literally recreating cities of the past. It's really fun. And now that we can have a seamless mosaic, we can get a lot more detailed in our investigation. So we can see bottom left, there's the school and the gasometer, the gas works, but there are a whole bunch of other industrial sites that would have been potentially hazardous, and they're in very close proximity to black institutions. There are 3 different churches indicated on this map. And again, we look at the redlining boundary, and it just really shows how that boundary is very arbitrary in comparison to features that end up on the map. We're a little bit later, so we're looking at 1952 here, redlining map created in 1937. But I think there's still value here, especially when we're looking at health inequality. But what gets really, really exciting, and this is the part that we're just getting started on, is it's great that I can highlight all this in QGIS, but it's not very efficient. So now we're starting to process the Sanborn maps with OCR, and we're using MapReader, which is an amazing tool developed by Living with Machines, and they have this map text pipeline. And using the resources of the university, we can process 3 maps per minute, 16 maps at a time, and begin to read these programmatically. And the result is a crazy point map like this. Each of these points correspond to a label read from the map, and we've highlighted a couple different categories. Orange is industrial, yellow is commercial, gray is residential. We're still fine-tuning this. We're still definitely in an experimental phase, but we can now start to look at trends in a much granular level compared to census tracts, and we see the patterns that we expect hold. And let's see if the internet holds up. I know I have just a minute here, but the really exciting thing that we're working on is a new website that will allow, oh, shoot, I gotta get out PowerPoint. that will allow folks to look at this in more detail. Hold on one second, fill that up. Right, so now we can turn on different points. This is Tacoma, so industrial points we've detected in Tacoma, homes, commercial, civic and public infrastructure, and segregation. I don't think there's too many of these for Tacoma. But we can also generate a heat map of where industrial and potentially hazardous sites are. And we can also start to, well, there's those charts. And then we can also start to explore the different types. So this would be, oh, hold on. Beta, live demo. Observe at your own risk, right? So different, where gas is showing up, or oil, paints, cleaning, laundry. These are all different potentially hazardous types of industries, and we're still building out this dictionary and working with experts of how to actually do this in like an accurate way. Yeah, but it's really cool. I'm sure if I had like, I don't know if timber's on here. Oh yeah, there's like cutting or sawdust. That's probably big for the industry here. But to wrap it up, the point is that we're just getting started with this, and I'm really excited about it. This is the QR code to mapping inequality. Thank you for sticking it out. Yeah, NACIS is awesome, and I hope that you get on Adam's platform and georeference more maps, because that allows us to scan them, to process them, and to create the data that we hope to be able to give to epidemiologists and to do a much more robust study of the legacies of redlining. Thanks. Okay.
Any questions?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, so that, I should totally mention that is more done by my boss, Rob Nelson. He's an amazing thinker, and we're still figuring out how best to use MapReader. Right now, we're just kind of ignoring that part so that we can derive centroids. But one of the big issues that we have is like we need to figure out a way to filter out non-relevant information and also see if we can maybe get some more spatiality than just a centroid. So, TBD.